In the other feature fight between Mark Hunt and Alistair Overeem, this again was a rematch from 2008. Mark Hunt was unable to avenge his loss. Alistair Overeem won this fight as well in the third round by knockout. In my prediction last week, I had said this was going to be a really tough one to call. I ended up deciding that I felt that Mark Hunt would be able to finish him off, and my reasoning for that was I felt like both of these guys were going to be able to land some shots. Hunt would be able to eat his, and once he caught Overeem, Overeem would get stumbled and be unable to recover. And early on, it looked like that was going to be the case. Hunt landed some really hard shots in the first round, and the second, he landed a really big elbow that had Overeem rocked. After the fight, Overeem even admitted he didn't remember being hit by it. He was told that he was hit by it, and fortunately for him, he was able to survive. He got through it, and once the third round came along, he was able to get Overeem, or he was able to get Hunt against the fence, landed a few big knees, and was able to knock him out cold. And that's a very big win for Alistair Overeem. Obviously, in the heavyweight division, they're fairly limited on contenders, so with a win by Junior Dos Santos over Stipe Miocic, there's a chance that he could find himself in a title fight extremely soon. There was talk about Francis Ngannou after this. That fight doesn't seem to be happening. It looks as though Ngannou's got another matchup that's going to be booked. Dana White wouldn't say who it was, but it sounds as though that door is closed. You could be looking at Derek Lewis a little bit down the line, but again, Overeem isn't too far out of a title shot right now with this win. For Mark Hunt, it's his second loss in a row right after the loss to Brock Lesnar. Can't imagine that he's too happy about it right now, especially after the issues he's had with the UFC. And speaking of those issues obviously were regarding USADA handling Brock Lesnar, how he had tested positive before the fight, or he had tested positive on a test that was administered before the fight, but the results came in after the fight. So he had fought a Brock Lesnar that was juicing. With this fight, Alistair Overeem had some issues with food poisoning. He went to the doctors, got an IV before the fight, which is technically legal, although there are therapeutic use exemptions. It sounds as though everything is above board on that, but if there is anything that is not above board on that, I would hate to know how Mark Hunt's going to handle the thought of having fought another guy, having lost another guy, and having lost brutally to a guy who had either been skirting the rules or who had been slipping past the rules in order to use an IV after weighing in. Now, at heavyweight, it's a little more complicated at heavyweight than it is at other weights, because generally with heavyweight, especially for Alistair Overeem, it's not like he's cutting an immense amount of weight and just slipping into 266. He's well under. He doesn't really need to cut weight to make heavyweight. Whereas at the lower weights, you've got guys who might walk around at like 178 who have to cut down to 155, for example, and for them, being able to use the IV can help them cut down a little bit further, and it sort of gives them an advantage, and it's also unhealthy for them. So that rule makes more sense at lower weight. I don't feel like, even if he wasn't necessarily following the rules, I don't know that you could really say there was any kind of effect on this fight. But outside of that, with Mark Hunt, you never know how he's going to respond to it. It sucks to see him go out that way. Obviously, he's getting up there in age. He's one of the most exciting fighters that the UFC has on their roster, and it's kind of tough to see right now where he's at odds with them. They don't seem to be terribly pleased with him, and his last couple of fights haven't been the prettiest losses for him. Obviously, the Lesnar one didn't end up with a finish, but this one had a finish, and it was a very brutal finish at that. Mark Hunt also had thought that he had broken his tibia early in the fight. Obviously, he landed a kick on Alistair Overeem that busted his shin open, and from there, every single step he would take in the octagon, there'd be kind of like a blood spurt on it. Also, every time he'd kick Alistair Overeem, there'd be a big splotch of blood. His shin was bleeding pretty badly. They ended up having to cover it up with kind of like that Vaseline and adrenaline thing that the cut men use. Obviously, Joe Rogan was making an issue of it, saying that if this fight got to the ground later on and Alistair was looking for leg locks, then that could end up being an issue. Obviously, this fight stayed standing, so that never became a problem. But again, that's something that's kind of interesting, but it's not terribly common either. Outside of that, I feel like this fight kind of speaks for itself. It's tough to see Mark Hunt go out the way that he did. It's good for Alistair Overeem, but again, he's still a little chinny. Obviously, there really weren't any questions as far as that being fixed, but it still isn't taking a whole ton to rock him at heavyweight. That's always going to be a concern. You have to imagine the longer he fights, the more he fights guys like your Junior Dos Santos, Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, Stipe Miocic. He's probably going to get put out again, and you kind of wonder what the long-term plan for Alistair is. Does Alistair want to get the title and then kind of retire after that? Does he just want to keep going until he can't go anymore? it's not entirely clear. Heavyweight definitely needs some more prospects, and unfortunately, there just aren't a whole ton coming through right now. So, and again, on the undercard of this fight, you had Luis Enrique, Marcin Tybura, Mark Godbeer, Daniel Spitz, all those guys, and you would have liked to have seen a good performance from one of them to kind of indicate that they were up and coming, but it just doesn't seem to be the case right now. So these two still remain in the top 10. I'm sure Mark Hunt will still keep a spot in the top 10 even with the loss. Overeem was ranked higher than him at the time. Overeem, I believe, was ranked number 3 headed into this fight. So if you're number 8 and you lose to number 3, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're now number 10. So Hunt will still be a top 10 fighter. He's going to need some time to recover. Overeem, it seems like whether he needs time to recover or not, the next fight for him isn't going to be immediately, but it'll be fun to see these two guys fight again, or not fight each other, but have their next fights in the octagon. Hopefully Mark Hunt does have another fight in the octagon, and the UFC doesn't use this 2-fight losing streak on top of the lawsuit as an excuse to get rid of him, because he's a really fun fighter to watch, and I feel like he can still sell a lot.